good afternoon. Could we go ahead and run that commercial?
There is one thing you will never see here in the holiest city of Islam. Something considered so dangerous and blasphemous, it is banned in Saudi Arabia and persecuted even in Iraq. The one thing you will never see here is a Christian church, because Muslim tolerance for any other religion does not exist. So why do outraged Americans have to tolerate building a proposed 15-story mosque on sacred ground and be submissive to a religious double standard, when all over the world Christians are being persecuted, beaten, and killed at the hands of Muslim extremists? The same kind of extremists that attacked America on 9/11. And today we'll see a mosque at ground zero as a symbol of submission. This double standard is just one example of Muslim intolerance. There are many others. For more information, go to no911mosque.org.
That is the commercial that our organization has prepared in response to the construction of this alleged mosque on ground zero. And before I begin, I'd like to put about 24 hours of news out in front of you. There has been a bomb at a Danish hotel. It turns out that an individual was making letter bombs in order to send them to a Danish newspaper. Molly Norris, who is a cartoonist in Washington State, on the advice of the FBI, has changed her name and gone into hiding. She was the cartoonist who began the Draw Mohammed Day. 5 individuals have been arrested in the UK, Algerian street cleaners who were hatching a plot to murder the Pope, assassinate the Pope during his current visit to the UK. In the last 24 hours, 2 Buddhist brothers, or a father and son actually, were shot down in Thailand by Islamic extremists. 3 cops on their lunch hour were murdered in the Philippines. 2 children were killed in Afghanistan, and this doesn't include the attacks on NATO troops in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and in numerous other places. That's just 24 hours. So, with that in mind, let's talk about this New York mosque. Well, the question we face is, should a giant edifice to Islam be erected at ground zero? And it is the question that is facing Americans who are tired of decades of Islamic violence, including the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993, the downing of Pan Am Flight 103, the attack on the U.S. Cole that left so many of our brave sailors dead, injured, and the numerous other attacks, kidnappings, and hostage situations throughout the world. The Ground Zero Mosque debate has raged on for just a few months, but the stated reasons for its construction have morphed as proponents have been forced to change strategies. First, Americans were told that the Cordoba Mosque was intimately linked to Ground Zero, and that it was indeed a memorial to those lost in the name of Islam during that Islamic Jihad attack on September 11, 2001. As the overwhelming majority of 9/11 families voiced their opposition, the story changed. Suddenly, it was out of sight of Ground Zero and had nothing to do with that hollow ground. As more pressure built against it, President Obama and the mainstream media declared that the construction was an issue of religious liberty, of religious freedom. Then the real owner of the property came forward and proclaimed that it wasn't a mosque at all. Now I want to stop and address for just a moment President Obama and his concept of religious freedom. All of a sudden he can use those words. For his first 2 years in office, he never mentioned religious freedom or freedom of religion. He referred to it as freedom of worship. In fact, he directed Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to refer to the guaranteed freedom of religion that we have in the Constitution as freedom of worship. Now, what is the difference between religious freedom, freedom of religion, and freedom of worship? Well, the Muslims and the Muslim nations and the International Organization of Islamic Nations want to call it freedom of worship. Because in their view, that's what religious freedom is. You see, in freedom of worship, you're free to go to your church or your synagogue and worship. But you are not free to discuss your faith, to try to convert others, or to proselytize for your religion, but you have freedom of worship. My friends, there is a huge difference between freedom of worship and freedom of religion. As long as we were talking about Christians and Jews, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Obama wanted freedom of worship. Suddenly, when it came to the construction of this mosque, they were willing to have religious freedom. As a final twist, by the way, to this whole story, with so many against this, we are now told that now the mosque must be built at this location or there is going to be worldwide violence. Does this sound like a bridge to better understanding between faiths? Hardly. Well, I want to go back and look at the real history of this Islamic project at Ground Zero. The project began as Cordoba House. Now, many of you already know that Cordoba was the capital of Spain while that nation was under the subjugation of an Islamic caliphate. The period is viewed, by the way, as enlightened by Islamic scholars and the useful idiots that teach at our major universities in the West. Actually, during that period, Jews were made to wear special clothing. Indeed, that's where Adolf Hitler got the idea for Jews to be forced to wear the Star of David. And both Christians and Jews received second-class dhimmi status that required paying of a tax. All property, including wives, were viewed as being rented by paying the tax. Church and synagogues were allowed to exist, but could not be repaired or replaced. It was a time of repression, not of enlightenment. Now, by the way, this still goes on today. In fact, recently in Egypt, a brand new Coptic church was bulldozed down. They had received the permits from the secular government. But the local authorities and the originalist authorities, citing Sharia law and the status of dhimmihood, had the church bulldozed down. In dhimmitude, and I recommend, I have a good friend, he's an brilliant Australian theologian by the name of Dr. Mark Drury, and he has written a book called The Third Choice. And I recommend his book, and I recommend his website. If you just look him up under Mark Drury, you will find him. The third choice, by the way, that he refers to, whenever you are conquered by Islam, you have three choices: conversion, death, and then the third choice, dhimmitude, in which you accept a position as a second-class citizen and pay a tax to continue to be able to live under Islam. Now, once those that were opposed to the Cordoba House revealed to the public what the name implied, well, the name was changed to the Park 51. Well, then other problems arose. The media, wanting to assist in the promotion of Cordoba House, reported that both Christians and Jews served on the board of directors of it. But the reality was the corporation did not even exist. It was a planned 501c3, still does not exist. The man alleged to be the main planner, Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf, will be only one of 22 members of the board of directors of this alleged corporation, not yet to be formed, according to the real developer and owner of the property, Sharif El Gamal, who, by the way, purchased the land along with an existing building next to it. Both will be demolished. He bought this cash, as we know. Sharif El Gamal, who is 37 years old, and just a few years ago was waiting tables at a New York restaurant, has refused to identify where or who furnished, where the $4.8 million came from, or who the individuals were that were furnishing it. El Gamal, by the way, has a history of arrests involving assault, public drunkenness, DWI, petty theft, and solicitation of prostitutes. He was virtually destitute until he purchased rundown properties cash in New York several years ago, and where that cash came from, we're not sure. Imam Rauf, who has proclaimed that the building will be a bridge for interfaith activity, is associated with a mosque in New York City founded by his father. In October 2001, the imam there, Sheikh Mohammed Gamahaya, who was at that time the mosque of the Sheikh, declared that Jews had actually attacked the Trade Center's Twin Towers, and then he departed to the Middle East. Rauf has never condemned those statements and remains on the board of directors of that mosque. Other radicals are known to be frequent speakers at Imam Rauf's mosque. Faz Khan, he is a doctor who claims that he was a first responder at 9/11, although no one recalls seeing him there. And he states, quote, that Muslims were framed, and has written a paper to that regard. He is part of a group associated with called Muslims for 9/11 Truth. Now, he claims, by the way, as with other 9/11 truthers, that these aircraft didn't cause the buildings to fall, that there were internal devices, explosives planted beforehand that went off after the aircraft collided with the building. Some of them claim that it's video tricks and that the aircraft never actually even hit this. Now, are we supposed to believe that Rauf knew nothing of this man's beliefs when he was invited to speak at his mosque several times? Well, I don't think so. Hardly can it be when all that Khan talks about when he's asked to speak publicly is about his belief of these planted explosives inside the building. Now, by the way, at the height of this controversy, Imam Fazil Rauf was not available for comment, because at the time he was in the Middle East in the employ of President Barack Hussein Obama and Hussein Obama's State Department. He was there teaching those in the Middle East, quote, the role of religion in American society. Please note that Christian pastors and Jewish rabbis are not paid by the State Department to talk about or discuss the role of religion in America because of, guess what? Separation of church and state, that's right. Rauf was chosen by the State Department for this task because of his moderate views, which consist of the support of Hamas and Hezbollah, his declaration that the United States was a co-conspirator in the 9/11 attacks, and of course, also, he stated that, yes, he was in favor of the Israel-Egyptian peace accords because the Muslims needed time to strengthen themselves to later destroy Israel. He also has stated that Israel cannot exist as a Jewish state, that it has to be a majority Muslim state within which Jews live.